It was 7:12 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday when my banking app flashed a warning I had never seen before. A pending transfer, $20,000, out of my savings. The clock beside my coffee mug ticked louder than usual, like it was keeping score. Time has a way of separating truth from excuses, and I knew I had until 4 p.m. today before that transfer cleared for good. Someone had my numbers, not a stranger from a faraway place, someone who knew the shape of my life, where I keep my paperwork, how I label my folders, the kind of detail you only learn inside a family kitchen. I am 68. I count my freedom in small rituals, a morning walk, a trimmed lawn, a ledger that balances at the end of each month. Freedom is fragile when your savings can vanish with a tap. I called the bank. They confirmed access from an unfamiliar device, yet the login came from my town. Too close, too comfortable. I felt a chill that wasn't from the air conditioning. I changed nothing on the surface. I let the minutes pass. Because last month, after a different odd login I couldn't explain, I prepared for this. I built a decoy space, quiet and neat, where greed would hear its own footsteps. If you want to see exactly when the door closed, you'll see it at the 11:45 mark. Until then, watch the hands of the clock do their work. I live in a quiet neighborhood where the loudest sound most mornings is the drip of my coffee maker. At 68, I've built my days around a rhythm that suits me. A slow walk before sunrise, a tidy yard by mid-morning, and a seat at my desk by 10. From there, I balance my accounts, not because I have to, but because it reminds me I'm still steering my own ship. Time is my most valued currency now. Each day feels like a coin I get to spend however I choose, and my freedom is measured in these simple choices. When to mow the lawn, when to call my daughter, when to close the blinds against the afternoon sun. That Tuesday began like any other. A warm breeze came through the kitchen window, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass from next door. I glanced at the clock, 9:03 a.m., and opened my laptop to check the news. Out of habit, I clicked on my banking app. The balance looked normal. I poured myself another cup, the steam curling like slow-moving clouds. I remember thinking how good it felt to be unhurried, to own every minute of the morning. I had no idea those minutes were about to feel heavier. On my second glance at the screen, something caught my eye. A small notification in the corner. Recent login from a new device. It was subtle, almost easy to ignore, but it lingered there, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat you can hear in your ears when a room goes quiet. I didn't click it right away. I just sat there, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, feeling a thin thread of unease pull at the edges of my calm. Because sometimes the smallest ripple tells you a storm is on its way. I closed the notification without opening it, telling myself it was probably nothing. Banks send alerts all the time, most of them harmless. But as I sipped my coffee, I noticed my hands weren't as steady as they had been a moment ago. A faint draft came through the open window. I reached over to shut it, but my eyes kept drifting back to the laptop screen. Something about the timing of that login unsettled me. It wasn't during business hours. It was early, just after midnight. I wasn't awake then. I never am. I opened my transaction history. The list was clean. No unauthorized transfers, no strange purchases. Still, my attention snagged on the detail of that midnight login. The location was listed as within 10 miles. That's not a city, that's here, that's my backyard. The thought lodged itself in my mind. Whoever it was, they knew me. They knew my schedule, my habits, and worse, they had the nerve to test the lock without taking anything, like a hand brushing past your front door handle in the dark. Later that day, my son-in-law stopped by unexpectedly. He claimed he was just in the neighborhood and needed to borrow a ladder. We made small talk in the driveway, the kind that stays on the surface but swims over deeper waters. He asked about my garden, about my wife's health, and then, almost too casually, "How's the market treating your retirement fund these days?" I gave him a number, not the real one, a fraction. He nodded, but his eyes lingered a second too long, as if he was adding something up in his head. When he left, I watched him walk down the street, the ladder balanced on his shoulder. My mind wasn't on the ladder. It was on the midnight login and the subtle smile he'd tried to hide. And I couldn't shake the question, was that smile the sound of a door slowly opening? 2 evenings later, we all sat down for dinner at my daughter's house. The table was warm with conversation, the kind that drifts between the taste of the roast and the plans for the weekend. My son-in-law poured me a glass of iced tea, smiling as if the world were perfectly in order. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back in his chair, fork still in hand, and asked, "Ever think about moving some of your savings into something more aggressive? You know, to keep up with inflation?" I kept my expression neutral, but the question rang louder than the clink of silverware. I'd never discussed the exact structure of my accounts with him. My daughter didn't know the details either. Yet here he was, steering the conversation toward the precise nest egg I'd been protecting for decades. I deflected, telling a story about an old neighbor who had lost money in a risky venture. He laughed, nodding, but his eyes stayed sharp. Then, as if tossing in an afterthought, he mentioned a figure, my exact account balance from last week. Not rounded, not guessed. Exact. I felt the room change. The clock on the wall ticked, each second stretching longer than it should. My fork paused midway to my plate. I asked how he knew that number. He shrugged, saying he must have read something wrong on a financial news site. It was a sloppy red herring, but one I pretended to accept. I smiled and went back to my meal, though my appetite was gone. Every word after that was background noise. On the drive home, the glow of the dashboard clock lit the inside of the car. I thought about the midnight login, the exact number he shouldn't have known, the way his question came wrapped in casual conversation. And I knew then, if I waited, he'd try again. Which meant I had time to set the stage. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop circling the suspicion and walk straight into it. After my usual walk, I brewed coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop with a sharper focus than usual. I started by pulling up the detailed login history from my bank. There it was again. The same unfamiliar device, same early morning hour, same location radius. But this time the session lasted longer, nearly 12 minutes, long enough to navigate through menus, long enough to read balances, note account numbers, maybe even draft a transfer. I opened my old electronics drawer. Buried under a stack of manuals was a laptop I hadn't used in years. It clicked instantly in my mind. I'd lent it to my son-in-law 2 summers ago when his own computer broke. I never thought much about it when he returned it. I hadn't even wiped the system. My online banking credentials could still be saved there, tucked neatly in the browser's memory. My pulse steadied, not from calm but from clarity. I closed the drawer slowly, feeling the weight of the decision that was coming. This wasn't a random hacker. This was someone with my trust, my keys, and my habits memorized. I called the bank's security department. We reviewed the access logs together. They confirmed it. The device was logging in using stored credentials. I asked them to keep the account open, but to route any large transaction attempts to a special hold for verification. They agreed. With the right triggers, I'd see the attempt in real time. By the time I hung up, the plan had already begun to shape itself. The clock above my desk read 10:47. Time enough to build the kind of door that only closes once. And when it shuts, it stays shut. I didn't sleep much that night. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above me, its rhythm counting down the hours. By morning, the decision was no longer a question. It was a commitment. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. Confrontation would tip my hand. This had to end in a way that left no room for doubt, no crack for denial. Over breakfast, I laid out the plan in my head. Step 1, build a decoy account. The bank could open a secondary savings account under my name with its own number, its own login pathway. Into it, I'd place a sum large enough to tempt, not my real-life savings, but enough to make the risk feel worth taking. $50,000. The real money would be moved quietly to a secure account in another institution. Step 2, coordinate with my attorney. I called her office just after 9. She listened without interrupting, then asked one question. Do you want this to end in a courtroom or in a conversation? Courtroom, I said. There was no hesitation in my voice. Step 3, set the triggers. Any withdrawal attempt from the decoy account above a certain amount would be instantly frozen and rerouted to a legal holding account under my attorney's control. The bank agreed to mark the transaction as pending review on my end, so the initiator would believe it was still processing. By noon, the pieces were in place. The decoy account was live, funded and accessible from my usual dashboard, exactly where he would expect to find it. I leaned back in my chair, watching the second hand sweep across the clock face. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, about proving that my time and freedom were still mine to guard. Now all I had to do was wait for him to walk through the door I'd left unlocked. The waiting was the hardest part, but even waiting had work in it. That afternoon, I moved the rest of my real savings into the secure account at the second bank. It felt like sliding a precious heirloom into a locked safe, knowing no one else had the key. Then I returned to the decoy account. Its balance sat there in bold numbers, looking every bit like a lifetime of savings to anyone eager enough to take it. I logged out and left everything as it was. Same password, same security questions, same patterns he had probably memorized. I called the bank once more to confirm the tripwire was armed. Any withdrawal over $5,000 would freeze the account instantly, rerouting the request straight into my attorney's control. The bank officer assured me the process was invisible to the initiator. He'd believe he'd succeeded until the moment the letter arrived. The rest of the day passed in ordinary chores, trimming the hedge, checking the mailbox, reading the local paper. On the surface, nothing in my life had changed, but beneath it the stage was set. That evening, my phone buzzed with a system alert. New login from registered device. It wasn't my phone. It wasn't my computer. I sat in the living room, the grandfather clock ticking steadily behind me. The air felt still, heavy with the kind of anticipation you feel before a storm breaks. I didn't refresh the account. Not yet. This was his move. I had to let him believe the board was clear. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the houses across the street. I imagined him somewhere close, hunched over a screen, seeing the bait exactly where he expected it to be. And then, as the evening news played in the background, another alert appeared, the one I'd been waiting for. A withdrawal request large enough to trip the wire he was inside. And the trap was now closing. The next morning, I saw him before he saw me. I was in the hardware store picking up light bulbs when he turned into the same aisle, a box of screws in his hand. His surprise lasted less than a second before he plastered on that familiar, easy smile. "Hey," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Needed a few things." I let the silence stretch, then added, "How's everything at home?" "Busy," he replied quickly. "A lot going on." His eyes darted toward the shelf, then back to me. "How about you? Everything going smoothly?" The pause before the last words was almost invisible, but I caught it. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, the price of gas. On the surface, it was two men making small talk, but I could feel the undercurrent. Each word weighed, each glance measured. He was searching for signs. Did I know? Was I suspicious? I gave him nothing, just a calm, steady presence, the same as any other day. Inside, though, I was replaying last night's alert in my mind. The withdrawal request was frozen, the money rerouted to my attorney. At that very moment, he likely believed it was still processing. As we parted, he said, "We should catch up sometime soon." The words were casual, but there was a flicker in his expression. Maybe he thought I'd bring up the account, maybe he wanted to get ahead of it. Walking to my car, I checked the time, 10:22 a.m. The bank's system would still show his transaction as pending. He might think the payout would land before the weekend. What he didn't know was that the payout he was waiting for would never arrive, and the letter on its way to his mailbox would change the conversation entirely. By Thursday morning, the bank had confirmed the transaction was fully intercepted. The funds sat securely in my attorney's trust account, every detail logged. Device ID, IP address, timestamp, and the exact route the login took through my dashboard. The kind of evidence you don't argue with. But I didn't tell him. Not yet. The trap wasn't just about catching him, it was about letting him believe he'd won, right up until the moment the ground vanished under his feet. At 11:40 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from the bank. Transaction completed. For him, that line meant victory. For me, it meant the door had swung shut and locked behind him. 5 minutes later, my attorney called. "It's done. We've got everything we need. The letter's going out this afternoon." I pictured him opening his banking app, maybe even planning a quiet celebration. But when he'd try to move those funds again, he'd find nothing. Worse for him, the statement would show the transfer, but not to his account. Instead, it would list the receiving account under my attorney's name. A name he knew. A name that told him exactly who was watching. Time slowed as I sat at my kitchen table, the clock ticking toward noon. The air outside was still heavy. In that stillness, I imagined the moment his phone would buzz, his eyes scanning the numbers, the slow dawning realization that the money had slipped out of his hands the instant he touched it. Some traps don't spring with a snap. They close like a quiet door, one you don't realize is locked until you try to leave. And now, he was inside. By Friday morning, the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for weeks began to unwind. The alerts stopped coming. My real savings sat untouched in the secure account, safe and steady. The decoy account now showed a frozen status, a silent monument to the trap that had worked exactly as planned. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, feeling the cool air move across the yard. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe without listening for another shoe to drop. The neighbor's dog barked in the distance, the mail truck rumbled by. Ordinary sounds returning to an ordinary morning. Still, I knew the quiet wasn't permanent. Sometime in the next day or two, the letter from my attorney would land in his mailbox. It would outline the intercepted transfer, the logged credentials, and the fact that the bank and legal authorities had the entire trail mapped from his device to the attempted withdrawal. I didn't need to imagine his reaction. I'd seen that look before, years ago, when someone realized too late they'd underestimated me. It wasn't anger or fear exactly, it was the weight of knowing there was no way out. Inside, the grandfather clock chimed the hour. I thought about how close I'd come to losing not just money, but the comfort of deciding my own future. Freedom isn't just having resources, it's having the ability to protect them. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood. The trap had closed, and I'd walked away with everything that mattered. He still didn't know I'd been watching the whole time. That was the part I savored, not to gloat, but to remind myself I hadn't lost control, not for a second. The call came late Sunday afternoon. My daughter's number lit up the phone, her voice tight from the start. "Dad, did you send something to Michael? He just got this letter from a law office." I told her we should talk in person. 30 minutes later, they were standing in my living room. Michael's usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a guarded stare. He held the letter in one hand, the paper slightly crumpled as if he'd been gripping it too hard. "This says," he began, his voice low, "that I attempted an unauthorized transfer from your account, that the funds were intercepted, that there's evidence." He looked at me, searching for a crack in my expression. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I didn't answer his question directly. Instead, I asked, "Why would my bank log your device ID on my account at 2 in the morning?" His eyes flickered, a brief flash of panic before he tried to steady himself. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid a copy of the bank's access logs across the coffee table. The timestamps, the IP address, the device information. His name, printed clearly on the associated customer record from the internet provider. There was no room left for denial. Silence settled between us. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second drawing the space between us tighter. My daughter looked from him to me, her face pale. Finally, I spoke. "You had a choice. You could have asked if you needed help, but you chose this instead." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than anything I could say. As they left, he didn't look back. The door closed softly behind them. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. Some lessons are expensive. For him, the cost had just come due. The house was quiet again. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the lawn. I sat by the window, the letter from my attorney now resting in my desk drawer, its purpose fulfilled. It wasn't about the $50,000 in the decoy account. That money had been bait, nothing more. What mattered was the proof, not just for the bank, not just for the law, but for me. Proof that I could still protect what was mine. Proof that time and freedom were still in my hands. I thought about the moment the trap closed. There was no triumphant cheer, no dramatic confrontation, just a silent shift, like a clock striking the hour in an empty room. That's the thing about time. It moves forward whether you notice or not, but when you do notice, you realize how much has changed. In the days that followed, I heard little from my daughter. The space was probably necessary. She would have to process her own feelings about what happened. As for Michael, the legal process had only begun. The evidence was ironclad. Whether it ended in court or in a private settlement, the outcome would be the same. He'd never have access to my accounts again. I returned to my routines, morning walks, yard work, balancing my ledger. But now, there was a quiet strength behind each choice. I had stared down a betrayal that came from closer than I'd ever expected. I had responded without panic, without haste, and on my terms. Freedom, I realized, isn't just living life the way you want. It's defending that life when someone tries to take it from you. It's having the patience to wait, the clarity to plan, and the resolve to act when the moment comes. As I watched the sun sink behind the trees, the grandfather clock chimed 6. Another hour gone, another safely kept. I smiled to myself. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. And in the quiet that followed, I knew this chapter was over. But my time, my freedom, and my watchful eye would remain.